Hi everyone, and welcome to the Bidstack Gaming Upfronts. Bidstack is a leading technology provider for in-game advertising, and I am joined today by some amazing guests, Ed Gregory at Fnatic and Daniel Baines at Mindshare, to talk about why luxury brands have found their home in gaming. But before we do that, I'm just going to show a quick sizzle reel of some campaigns by Fnatic and by Bidstack. Great, well, the brands we just saw there are Paco Rabanne and Burberry, which Bidstack has been working with. And Paco Rabanne, we recently won a Media Week award in the fashion and beauty category. And Burberry has done custom integrations with us and also in-game advertising. But I want to go straight in and start talking about why luxury is in this space. And I'm going to start with you, Ed, because you worked with Gucci for Fnatic, and now, congratulations, last week you announced that ASOS is your new front of shirt partner.
Yeah.
So why are luxury brands coming to the esports space and gaming generally, do you think?
I mean, for me, the main reason they're coming in is for relevancy. I think you find that obviously Gucci is a brand, it's well established, it's seen as a really premium luxury brand, but there's probably a market that they haven't been communicating with, and they need to communicate with that audience if they want to continue, creating clothes, continue to be seen as this premium, cool brand. And the way they do that is they communicate with people in the way they are consuming media at the moment. And I think we'll talk about it in a second, but gaming is becoming the new form of social media. It's the new way of interacting with your friends, your family, whatever it is. So for them to be relevant, they've got to step into that space, but they've got to do it in an authentic way that isn't just a case of taking advantage. They've got to be a natural fit for that environment.
Yeah, and that's certainly really important to us as an in-game. It has to fit with the audience and it has to look right. And we hear a lot about authenticity, and I'm sure Dan's going to talk about that now. But from an agency perspective, and we've sort of chatted on how we can be authentic, get in game, make it relevant. What are your thoughts about why luxury is there and how they're using it currently?
I think there's a couple of big things that sit behind it. You've both touched on them. I think we all know that gaming is massive, right? It's grown so much in the last 20 years. I think even now it's like there's more than double the amount of gamers in the world than there are Catholics, which is just astounding, right? I think from a luxury perspective, very much to Ed's point, Boston's forecasting at the moment that I think 61% of the luxury industry by 2026 will be millennials, they will be Gen Z. So ultimately, tapping into those properties that resonate with those audiences now is very much a safe bet from a luxury perspective. I think the added driver you've got behind that as well is that luxury audiences, because they are traditionally affluent, they will ultimately have the newest tech first. So ultimately it gives them another touch point to grow into, particularly at a time when it's very hard to obviously grow brands and businesses.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of nuances between titles. As you said, there's gamers are everywhere, but whether in something like Apex Legends, which has just been voted the most diverse game, or if you've done work like Louis Vuitton did for League of Legends, where 55% of that audience is female, 10% players non-binary. I feel like all of these sort of profiles of games, really sing into their brands, and they can use them in really different ways. But what do you think the challenges are for brands to kind of get into gaming? Because luxury's led the way, but actually now it probably is moving to a bit more of a broadcast element and other brands are stepping in.
Yeah. Go for it. So I think from an authenticity standpoint, it is always the biggest thing. I think what's been fantastic over the last couple of years is you've moved from ultimately a couple of small disciplines like in gaming or on platform to a much broader ecosystem. So I think the challenges for a lot of brands is where to start. So I think you can either look at it from in the game perspective, where you have to really be relevant to the audience and the game. or you can look at it from away from the game, or even just around the game. So I think there's so many different opportunities there that a brand can fit into. I think it's about focusing on the right ones for them and their audiences ultimately, because that's ultimately how they're going to grow quicker.
Yeah.
You touched on away from the game there, and that's going to say this is probably your area the best. So what brands are you seeing coming into that away from the game space, and like what challenges do you have as a business to move brands into it?
So, I mean, it's always going to be an education process. I think, you know, a lot of people know they want to be in there, they want to be playing in that space, but they don't know quite how to get in there. So what we do as as Fnatic, we have various levels of entry from the, high-end major global deals to sort of campaigns or entry, we call them entry to esports things, where we want people to dip their toes, come and see what it's about, we'll prove the value, and then hopefully it transfers into bigger campaigns. We've seen what we've done with Jack Links before. We did a short-term 3-month campaign. They've now signed a 3-year deal with us as a result of what we could go back to them with. And I think you're seeing, some brands, it's a really organic fit. Luxury brands, for an example, fit really, really well, because I think a lot of gaming and esports is about self-expression. People see the version of themselves in games as a version of themselves. So for fashion to exist in that space makes complete sense, and it's an organic fit. The same as, car brands fitting into racing games, organic fit, but they're starting to step into other ways and want to find, as we've done with BMW, they want to be seen as an enabler to bring esports closer to the fans, and that's another organic way of getting in there. So I think for the most part, it's about the education process and realizing you can't just stick your logo on something and you're going to be, automatically done well. You've got to have an authentic way of bringing that to life. Yeah. You can be a front of jersey partner because that is still a powerful, impactful place, but you've got to then expand on that and do it in an organic way. And we say that, when we're talking to brands, you can come and put your advert on Twitch, but of that audience, we found from Global Web Index that 72% of them have ad blockers. Yeah. So that's why you've got to do it through Teams. You're doing it through, platforms like yourself, where you can organically and authentically integrate yourself into the space. And that's a way you can touch the audience in a way that others can't.
Yeah, that's great. And you touched on a lot of points there that very interesting of you. You've never stuck a logo on anything, Dan. You've worked across so many brands across the years, right? And you've educated a lot of clients on new disciplines, and you've been in the Future Media's team at Mindshare for a while. On that education piece then, and about kind of creating this authenticity and organic fits, what can people be doing to educate their clients? And I'm thinking more of the agency side and how they get into this huge white space, because as we said, there's titles for everything. There's alignment for all types of different games. So how do you start vetting through that as an agency and making good, smart choices for clients?
I think it always starts with your client's business objectives, right? Mm-hmm. So ultimately, from a strategic perspective, you're looking at the biggest growth areas for them, the biggest growth areas from their audience, and trying to accelerate that as quickly as possible. I think Ed touched on a number of really interesting ways that luxury brands are entering the space at the moment, purely because what they're simply doing is extending on the passion points they've invested in traditionally for the last 40, 50 years. So it's going into territories, whether it be a tennis game and you're a Wimbledon sponsor, or however that may appear, they're ultimately leveraging that space as a first port of call. From a maturity standpoint, you've obviously got bigger businesses out there that invested years ago in gaming, like the Nikes or the Cokes or the Pepsi or so on. So they already built that authenticity up with an audience, which is ultimately that millennial and Generation Z audience, right? Because they know that it's going to be, or it has been, pivotal to their lives as an audience throughout their lives. Mm-hmm. Whereas now, I think what you're finally seeing is luxury brands are seeing it as a new way to engage and grow. And over those 10 years, I think what's really sort of brought it to the fore is the cultural expansion. So if you think about, there's quite a good case study of Obama in 2008, where he ultimately, him and his administration, they ultimately targeted in-game advertising in swing states to obviously influence there. Fast forward to last year, and you've got Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez in Among Us live on Twitch talking to a constituency, and I think that kind of shows the expansion of the space in a really nice, neat way. Is in this very sort of limited broadcast model to now one of which is a one-to-one conversation ultimately.
Yeah, no, great. I love the example of her playing Among Us, just because I do love mobile gaming hugely. And actually, maybe that's the point. I think there's been a recent study that during the pandemic, a number of people surged to gaming, especially around mobile. And a YouGov study says that out of those audiences, they're not going to go back. So they're going to keep on with the gaming time in the day. Do you distinguish kind of between mobile or the console elements? Do you think it's just about the right brand and the right fit, or do you think the audiences are totally different? Like, what's your opinion on kind of the different ways to game?
I think it depends on what the brand's trying to communicate, because the platform or the environment will dictate how you communicate it. So I think it really depends on how integrative of an experience you want to go, and that's where you obviously build a lot of depth from an authenticity standpoint, or whether it's simply you want to get quick messaging out in neutral, natural environments. And I think the two balance each other. It's that classic case of reach versus frequency from a planning standpoint.
Yeah, okay. And I think on that, there is kind of a view that the console element of gaming has got much more affluency in it maybe than the mobile. But from my side, I think mobile is a great way of purchase. And trying to think about how luxury is using that title and affluency. I know we had a really good example earlier when we were discussing this about Roblox and a handbag in the game that costs more than real life. There's a lot of kind of downloadable content. Animal Crossing did Tommy Hilfiger, you could skin your avatar. As I said, LVMH have done League of Legends with like a $30 skin. Thinking about the affluency piece and your metaverse or virtual world self, how do we think, the younger generation is going to start spending and utilising the games? It doesn't always have to be about luxury, but spending in game and in the physical world as well.
Do you want to take that one? Because you did the Gucci.
Yeah, very much so. I mean, for us, our collaboration with Gucci was obviously a limited edition watch that we released, but the reason they have started to basically extend beyond just Fanatics partnership, and they've worked with Roblox. They've got a few other exciting things coming up, which I won't release, and they're going to, sort of surprise people with. Yeah. But I think, as I said earlier, it's people see their gaming selves as an extension of themselves. So spending in-game and how you are perceived in-game is as important to how they are perceived in real life. You also sometimes may see that someone's in-game self is a reflection of who they maybe really want to be and are sometimes struggling with some things in real life, but it allows them to truly express themselves in a way where they maybe don't feel judged, maybe don't have these things to worry about, and that's why they're willing to spend the money there. So I think the spending within game is only going to increase because people are going to spend more time there in terms of it's going to turn into more of a social media than it currently is. If I'm spending my time on Instagram, the only way I can showcase myself on Instagram is a real photo of the real me, so I'm going to spend my money in real life. But if my social media platform is becoming Roblox, is becoming Fortnite, and I can express myself in there, I'm going to be as willing to spend money in Fortnite and Roblox as I am willing to spend, at a real Gucci store.
Yeah. Yeah, that's certainly true. And people like The Sims, my favourite games, have done a lot around that simulation and having, Gucci and brand. And it doesn't even have to be kind of a realistic example. It can just be how you skin or communicate. Yeah. So, really interesting.
I think what you have there is ultimately these platforms are now, we talk about growth quite a lot at Mindshare and good growth specifically. So a lot of these, and that used to mean geography-led growth historically. Now it's more about these bigger digital platforms. These are the countries that people ultimately spend their time in, right? So if you're a millennial audience or a Gen Z audience, you typically, you're very much on the right area, I think, where brands can be taking a bigger advantage is around the identity side of things and ultimately making sure that those communities are authentic to real life. They're ultimately representative. They're ultimately tackling issues that have otherwise existed since the 90s. The body ideals of Lara Croft and Tomb Raider alone is probably up for discussion. Or from a male perspective, Duke Nukem with a massive gun. It's these types of areas do need addressing in gaming, and I think that is a very rich territory for brands to start to engage.
Yeah, definitely. And one thing that I was really shocked when I entered gaming was how many women play shooters. We work with Rainbow Six, so do you. And nearly 30% of that audience is female. And that's a very diverse audience of people that like to shoot. Kind of comes on to the point I was going to talk about violence in game and how a lot of the luxury brands are going into those big games, which can be perceived as quite violent. Perceived, maybe, actually, not very quite violent. other brands will have concerns around that space. Maybe it's right for luxury, maybe it's not right for them. What are your feelings on violence in game for both of you, really, from a planning perspective, and also esports tends to be the biggest games on the planet, which are shooters.
Yeah, I mean, from an esports perspective, Counter-Strike is in all senses of the word is a violent game, but it is that. It's a game, and it's where people are expressing themselves, and like you say, it's, the stats are there are as many women playing some of these games as there are men. There's no gender sort of specific things. So yes, they can be violent, but I think the key for brands is to see these as a game. These are a way for people, to have fun, interact with people. It's how they're connecting with friends. I don't think any of them are going and playing these games thinking, they want to do the violence. They're doing it because it's a game and it's enjoyable and it's a way of interacting with their friends. I think some brands are understandably nervous about going into those places, and there are esports that are more friendly, Dota, FIFA, League of Legends, which are much more understandable and let's call it palatable for brands to dip their toes in. We work with BMW, who at the moment don't work with the Red Blood games, so they don't partner with our Rainbow Six and our Counter-Strike team, but they are on Valorant, which is FPS, but there's no Red Blood in the esport. And that's their way of sort of moving into the space and navigating it as a brand and what they're comfortable with. I have no doubt we'll see brands opening up over time, because it really is just a game and a really good way of engaging with an audience. And over time, once these become more and more, I guess, less taboo, as the whole term gaming was, 2 years ago, people wouldn't have been involved in it. So it's definitely growing all the time and becoming more and more open.
So I don't need to give up on being the first Sims player in esports for Fnatic.
Definitely not.
Maybe it's out there. But yeah, look, just thinking about wrapping up and kind of final thoughts, I'm sure we can talk about this all day in different areas. What do you think the future and the next steps are for gaming? And that's a very loaded question, I get, but it's kind of, what do we think trends will be emerging maybe next year? As I said, luxury's been a bit of a trend this year in terms of the category, and we've talked about NFTs and we were chatting earlier, and that's coming in. But yeah, firstly to you, Dan, what do you think the future may hold?
That's a very, very broad question. I think from more of the expansion into a metaverse and from that side of things, I think you're going to see a lot more hardware out there, particularly from more from the virtual reality and mixed reality spaces. So I think as that gets more sophisticated, that's ultimately going to open up a lot of doors, and I think open it up to a much broader audience. I think the upswing of female gamers has been going for such a long time. Yeah. That's the other big one that I can see brands and businesses engaging with those gamers the most.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, like Fordzilla's got Leviathan's their captain, and she's looking for female new people to recruit, and I think that is definitely the way it's going. But it will be how brands authentically attach themselves to a female audience in the right way for the right game. That will be really interesting, I think, next year to see how people do it and do it well. And as we start seeing other brands coming on, like the sort of Doves of the world, or maybe less premium but still targeting the audience, that will be really interesting. Sorry about the loaded question, but what do you think the sort of future is for gaming, and from your side of things, from esports?
Oh, I mean, you've answered it pretty well. I think from activating our brand, it's definitely going to be that expansion into the metaverse more and more. And we've used that buzzword a million times, and the metaverse is so broad, but I think you're going to be able to activate partnerships through AR filters. NFTs are definitely coming into the space. I think you'll see a crossover between NFTs and physical products, where you almost choose whether you want the NFT or the physical product, and one carries value over the other. So I think that's going to be an expansion. I would like to see, and it sounds strange, but more of the boring brands into the space. And when I say the boring brands, they're not necessarily boring, but brands that aren't engaging with the space, who have traditionally been involved in sponsorship across traditional sports. I think there's a huge market that they are going to find is untapped. People who are starting to, get their first bank account, things like that. Those are brands that are not doing a massive amount yet, and I think there's a huge opportunity for them. And because it's a natural fit, having been seen in traditional sports sponsorship, it'll be good for them to sort of enter the space and hopefully navigate that through teams, through publishers, and however it's done.
Yeah, and I think it's so right. I think the CPG brands, they're obviously snacking and gaming, snacking go hand in hand. So we've seen lots of like PepsiCo and Doritos this summer doing activations with us. I think as we're kind of moving forward, we're just sort of thinking about how we bring in like those finance categories and start to open it up and just capitalise on, well, double the amount of Catholics, would you say, amount of gamers in the world. Yeah, so thank you so much for sitting with me today, both amazing. And I had really interesting chats with you both, and I'm sure that if anyone's got any questions, they can pop it along to us.
Brilliant.
I've got loads of questions. So you're going to have to start with me first. I thought that was brilliant. Lauren, it's so clear, you're so passionate about this. It's sort of rare that you get this in panels, but I thought it was absolutely brilliant. Ed, if I could start with you, give us some of these boring brands. I'm joking. I'm obviously joking. Lauren, we talked a lot about female, you talked about non-binary audiences. When do you think we stop having this conversation where there is this perception that it is sort of incredibly male and football games? Why are we still having that conversation? People, it's out there to be educated, isn't it?
Yeah, well, I think it also starts at home in the gaming industry. Like, there's no surprise in my sales team, there aren't that many women that want to come into gaming, and that's probably because the space sometimes, without brands in it, just the games, can be a little bit toxic. There are shooters, examples on like TikTok of women arguing there's a woman in the game, and I think while we project that and let that continue to be the narrative, then we will have an issue with women feeling comfortable in the gaming space. Yeah. As soon as women feel comfortable in the space, brands will get involved with them because the audience is there. But I think it's about, when we're talking about the sort of metaverse or virtual world and how your perception, you could be a 30-year-old man who's playing as a 15-year-old female in an avatar game. It's how you want to project yourself in that game. Yeah. And I think that will change. Well, as I said, you said about Lara Croft and those they're not very diverse in terms of characters in the old days, but now we are seeing things like Apex with millions of different characters, lots of different options to play as, and you can just switch it up as you feel.
Yeah. I love how Dan Baines, my shared brother, categorised as working on every single brand possible within the network. But how do you stop gaming being something that perhaps is sort of, in that test and learn bit at the bottom of the media plan, quite executional, to something where it feels very, very strategic? How does it sort of move up that ladder?
How does it move up the ladder? I think immediately, as soon as you can start showcasing those results. And I think what you see now is, because there clearly it is a massive growth area for a lot of brands, a lot of brands want to get it right and they want to overinvest in it. They see that they're behind the curve and they need the expertise of agencies or consultants to ultimately step into that space and help them navigate where they need to go, because ultimately that's the expertise that we provide. It's not necessarily what they know about. They know their business, we know our business, and that's where we should ultimately be complementing one another. Yeah,
and of the 30 or so new things brands can be trying, from whether it's VR or it's gaming, how do you make sure gaming kind of has its place? Because it can be bamboozling, right? I mean, clients are trying to do a day job and sell more things, get more people to use their services. How do you sort of guide them into taking risks around different areas like gaming? I think it goes back to those business objectives. Is it about growing your brand? Is it about growing your sales? Is it about focusing on a particular type of audience? Yeah. It's ultimately helping them to prioritise those areas and then basically finding them the most relevant opportunities for those spaces, working with great partners like Fnatic and Bidstack. Amazing. Spoken like a true strategist. He's good, actually, isn't he? Very good. He's very, very good. Well, there were 6 mentions of the metaverse, which we haven't had any yet. So if anyone playing metaverse bingo, you've had 6 there. Love the Duke Nukem reference. And I completely forgot about that Obama campaign. That was one that was showcased a lot, wasn't it, around doing in game. Very early doors. Lauren, Ed, Dan, thank you so much. That was absolutely brilliant. Thank you.
Thank you.